So in today's video, I'm going to be talking to you about this issue. So what happens when your work, which is supposed to be a square, ends up looking a bit like a rainbow? This happens usually because this starting chain is too tight. Before you're sure that that is really the issue, you should count your stitches and be sure that you have the right number and that you haven't added any stitches as you go. But if you end up looking like this, then your issue is almost certainly that your chain is too tight. And that's caused mainly with a tension issue at the beginning when you're making your chain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can be sure, how you can make your chains so that they are not too tight in the beginning. And then afterwards, I'm going to show you what you can do if you are in this situation. So let's say you've already made like a blanket with 200 stitches, you're into the third row and you realize that, oh dear, my chain's too tight. I will show you a way that you can save your work and not have to undo everything and start over again. Undoing everything and starting over again is always an issue. It's always a possibility. So if that's easier, if you're not too far into your project, then you probably want to do that. But I will show you a way that you can actually fix this and get rid of your too tight chain. But that comes later. So if you're only interested in that part, then I will put a link in the description and you can just skip to that part. So now I'm going to show you how you can make your chains so that they are not too tight and how you don't end up in this situation where you end up with a rainbow. Let's see how that works. So the first thing that I want you to do is to actually have a look at your hook, have a close look at it. And what you'll see is that your hook has a part here which is a bit thicker, and then a part at the tip of your hook which is actually much narrower. So it doesn't matter whether you're crocheting with this type of hook, which is called a tapered hook, or an inline hook which has a kind of cutout at the end. Both types will have this part of the hook which is actually the size of the hook. So this is a 4mm hook, so this part of my hook is 4mm. This part at the end is much smaller. And what happens is when you're making your chain, if you make your chains right on the end of your hook, then your chains are always going to be smaller because that part is narrower. So what you want to be doing is to always be sliding your chains up the full length of your hook. And let me just show you how that works. So let me just, make my slip knot. Not like that. There we go. There's my slip knot. I'm just going to go ahead and do a couple of chains because it's easier for me to show you when it's not the first one. Okay, so let's have a look. So here I've got my chains. These are nice and loose, and I can tell because when I go back and I can easily get my hook in, I don't have to force my hook in, it's not too tight. So how do I get those tight chains? So you know what I said about the width of your hook? So if I crochet right on the end of my hook like this, and I make my chains right down here, then they will always end up being smaller because that's where my hook is smaller. And you can see that actually I'm having a hard time getting my hook through that loop because it's tiny, because I'm crocheting right on the end of my hook. And you can see that these loops are much smaller, and getting into them, if I was coming back to try and get into them, it's difficult. I would have to really push my hook in. And if I have to push my hook in like that, if it doesn't just go in easily like that, then I am going to end up with that situation where my chain is too tight. So crocheting on the end of my hook like that is going to make my chains too tight. The other thing that's going to make my chains too tight is pulling on this bit of yarn here. So when I've got my hook through the loop, if I now pull this yarn, it's going to make that chain much smaller, to the point at which I can barely even see it, let alone get my hook into it. So if I pull this yarn when I'm making the loops, it's going to make my loops smaller. So if I do that and then pull, my loops are really small, and I think I wouldn't even be able to crochet into those. It would just be too hard. So what's the right way then? So first of all, not too much tension on this piece of yarn. You want it to be straight but not pulled really tight, and you don't want to be pulling on it as you're making your loops. So yarn goes over, my loop is all the way up here on the thickest part of my hook, and I'm just going to pull my loop through. I'm not pulling with my finger, I'm actually letting it go a little bit as I pull it through. And then when I've got through, I want to be sure that I slide my loop all the way along to that thickest part of my hook. Then I can put my finger on it so that I don't accidentally pull with my finger and make it tighter. So then yarn over, not pulling with this finger, not pulling, just pull my loop through. And then as I come through, make sure and slide that loop all the way up onto the thickest part of my hook. Put my finger on it to hold it where it is so that it doesn't move around. And that's how to make loops that are not too tight. What you can also do is leave off your tension completely in this hand and just hold it between two fingers like this, so that there is no tension in fact. And then what I can do is hold my hook really loosely, and I'm not pulling at all, I'm just pulling my loops through like this, and they are going to be really loose, perhaps even a little bit too loose. But being a bit too loose is probably better if you have this issue where your chains end up being too tight. So doing this, so not having any kind of wraps around my fingers, just doing my chain like this without any real tension will make my loops nice and loose. Okay, so that's how to avoid it. If you want to, you can also even go one hook size bigger, and that will make your loops even bigger. So then, as long as you're sliding your hook all the way up so that you've got your loops on the biggest part of your hook, then you also will end up with bigger loops and make it easier to go into on the next row. Okay, so that's how to make your chains not too tight. If you still have problems, there is a way that you can use what's called a foundation crochet stitch. So a foundation single crochet or a foundation double crochet, or any of the other stitches in between. And that basically combines your chain stitch with your first row of stitches. I have another video about that, which I will link down below. So if you're interested in looking at that, then have a look at that link. So now I promised you that I would show you what to do if you are in this situation and you have a disaster and you don't want to undo everything and start again. So let's have a look at that and how that works. So what I'm going to show you now is how to fix this. So how to catch my bottom row of stitches and then remove my chain without everything unraveling. Now this is a little bit fiddly. So it could be that it's not really worth doing it, and you may as well just undo everything and start again with a looser chain. So that's really up to you, but I will show you how this works, and then you can decide if you think it's too fiddly and you would rather just start over, or if you have a really big project, then it might be worth just going through it and actually, fixing what you've got if you've put lots of hours into what you've got. Okay, so this is my chain at the bottom, and I've got 2 rows of double crochets. What I need to do now is I need to flip it upside down so that I'm going to work into the bottom of these stitches. Okay, I'm going to show you how that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just slide a slip knot onto my hook, like that. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to come up really close so that you can see properly. I want you to have a good look at the bottom of these stitches, and what you'll see is that there are some wraps here. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to start in the middle here, but I'm just going to show you. I'm actually going to put my hook into those wraps, so into that bottom leg and then this part that comes across, and I'm going to make a single crochet into that as though it was a stitch. Okay, that's how I'm going to save my stitches from unraveling. And once I've done that all the way down my row, then I can come back and I can undo this chain and nothing is going to unravel. So I have to start right at the beginning stitch, Now my beginning stitch is a little bit trickier because it's right on the edge, but what I need is 2 loops on my hook. So right there. I hope you can see that nicely. So now I'm going to make my single crochet into that stitch. So yarn over and bring it through, and then yarn over and through 2, like that. And then I'm going to work my way along, working into the sides and the bottom of those stitches. So into that loop, and then that loop. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky, so I'm just using my fingernail to get into that. So yarn over and bring it through, yarn over and bring it through. Okay, so into the bottom of my stitches. So there and there. Yarn over and through, yarn over and through 2. And I'm going to work my way all the way along this row of stitches. And what you can see as I go, I'm actually kind of making this weird extra row of stitches. So if I look at the bottom, that's my chain. This is my row of new stitches kind of into the sides of my last row. And what happens is when I undo this chain at the end, these stitches are going to kind of wrap around a little bit, and you're going to end up with it looking like this. This row is going to be slightly longer than your other rows, but it will not look so different that it looks weird, and probably you will be the only one to notice. If you're doing something like a blanket where you're going to anyway put a border on, then this is actually much easier, because then you will end up with this nice row of proper stitches which you can crochet into for your border of a blanket if that's what you're making. So yeah, so here and here, and do my single crochet into those stitches just like this. Okay, I'm going to carry on right up until the end, and then I will show you how to take out that chain. So now I just wanted to show you what happens right at the end. So I'm here at the end. I did my stitch into my last double crochet, but what I've got next is a chain where I chained up and then I did the next row, and I want to make sure that that chain is also secure. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my hook into a loop of the bottom loop of that chain, and I'm going to bring my yarn through and then straight through, so like a slip stitch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just cut my yarn, leaving a nice tail because I'm going to need to weave that in later, and then just bring it through my final loop. So now what I've got is I've got my bottom still with that tight chain, but I've got a nice row of single crochets into the sides of that bottom row of stitches. So it looks like this. It's a bit weird. So that's on one side, and then this is the chain on the other side. So now what I need to do is to undo that chain. Now, you can't just undo it by cutting it and then pulling it out, because what you need is to end up with a tail here that you can weave in later, because the rest of your stitches are still attached to that piece of yarn. So what I need to do now, this is my original slip knot where I started, so I need to undo it. You could cut it if you want, but I'm going to see if I can just undo it. Maybe it's easier. Let's see. If you are cutting into your work though, be sure that you are only cutting into these chains and not into the bottoms of your stitches, because otherwise things are going to come undone. Okay, have I got that slip knot? There we go. Okay, so now let's just, oh no, it didn't undo. Eventually. That's what happens when you're trying to demo something and then find that it's actually really harder. Okay, there we go. Right, so that's my slip knot undone. So now I need to undo these one by one, because like I said, because we're going in the wrong direction, we can't just pull it and undo it. So I need to just kind of tease it out and tease it out as I go, and soon you will see where the loops go. So just like that. There we go. So if you just pull it a little bit so that you can see where the yarn goes, then you can see that you can just pull it out like this. And eventually you get the hang of the route that the yarn takes. I am going to actually just cut that because I've got that knot there where the slip knot was. It's just catching. Okay, so I can just pull it a little bit and then I will see where it goes. So once you get used to undoing these stitches, you can just put your hook underneath and then just pull a little bit and they will just come out like that, just to make it a bit easier, like that. Okay, so I'm nearly at the end now. Okay, where are we going? Last one, I think. So if you don't want to actually undo the last one, you can just leave it in because you've actually undone enough now that it will not be tight anymore. But I think I've just got one more to go. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to leave that there. Okay, so now I've got some weird looking stuff here where I've got all these loops sticking up on the end and I've got my row of single crochet here. So all I'm going to do now is just give it a little tug to just pull those stitches down so that they are sitting on the bottom. Just tugging my stitches so that that row just sits nice and straight like that. Okay, and there we go. And then I have saved my work. Now it's all nice and stretchy, it's not too tight anymore, and even better, now I've got a nice row of single crochets on the bottom that if I'm doing a border I can just crochet directly into those. As I said, these stitches on the bottom, because you've added a single crochet into the bottom, they do look a little bit different than the ones above, but not so much that it looks weird. So basically you've just got a little bit extra length, a little bit longer, and they have obviously got a little bit more stitching into them, so they're a little bit fatter as well. This also means that your bottom edge is nice and stretchy, just like the top edge. So, you know, it's also a bonus that nothing is too tight. And that's how it works. Obviously, you still need to secure your ends just like you would normally by weaving them in. But nothing is going to come undone there because everything is securely into the bottom of the stitches. And so that's how to fix a chain that's too tight without undoing everything.